So today we are going to talk about shoe leather. This is a term that means different things in different industries. In journalism, it means to sort of go from door to door, checking sources, using up the materials in your shoes to kind of investigate. In grad school, I learned a way that it applies to creative writing, which is to say, using up the shoe leather of the characters unnecessarily. Here's an example. Joe was sitting on the couch. The doorbell rang. He got up, he walked to the door, he opened the door. Marjorie stood there. You could write that, but Joe used up some of his shoe leather walking from the couch to the door, and it's just not necessary to waste the reader's time with that because you know that when the doorbell rings, he's going to get up from the couch, he's going to go to the door. So the doorbell rang, Joe answered the door, Marjorie stood on the doorstep. A little more efficient. The way that shoe leather appears in films is most often with driving and parking. There are a lot of really terrible movies that kind of rely on driving and parking scenes to eat up some of the runtime of the film. And sometimes they indicate things about the characters, where they're going, where they're coming from, who they are. But for the most part, they're just a waste of time. So, for instance, here's a scene from Psycho 2. It's 40 seconds of one character leaving somewhere, getting in her car, driving off, and then another character following her. This could have been accomplished in so many ways that don't waste the audience's time like this, with mundane maneuvers filmed on celluloid. You could have mentioned it in a conversation, you could have used an interesting angle, you could have done any number of things that are not this. The movies we're going to talk about today, there's one example of shoe leather, there's one example of completely eliminating shoe leather, and there's one example of the director doing something completely different with the same sequence of events that we see in the other two movies. All of these characters are taking cabs from the airport. The movies are Suspiria from 1977, directed by Dario Argento. The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh from 1971, directed by Sergio Martino, and Final Justice from 1985, directed by Greydon Clark, one of the great auteurs of bad movies. The first thing we'll watch is the scene from Final Justice. The character played by Greydon Baker, you can obviously tell he is a lawman and he's from Texas. He is escorting a man back to Italy. The plane has to land in Malta, and that's where we are when this scene starts.
Yes, sir.
Those bags in the back, did we, pal?
Sure. Okay, where to, Tex?
Police headquarters.
Police headquarters, are you in some trouble, sir?
Just trying to get police headquarters in. Carry this up front with you,
Will
eh?
do, boss. Will do, boss. Yes,
Thanks,
sir,
pal.
boss. Where do you come from, Tex?
Texas.
Oh, Texas. I knew. Do you know John Wayne? Americans, eh?
Hey, pal, you're on the wrong side of the road. Get over.
No. I'm all right. We're on the left side. The boat that we drive on the left.
So the stuff that you saw here was all unnecessary. It doesn't develop character, it doesn't set up any plot, it doesn't add anything to the film. It's just filler. It's just shoe leather, or in this case, it's tire rubber. We don't really need to see anything about the way that Greydon Baker and his prisoner get from the airport to the taxi to their next destination. All of this stuff outside the airport and in the cab, not necessary. So the next example we're going to look at is from The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh, and it is amazing how it just cuts everything unnecessary. It's so short, too, so be ready for that. Here we go.
Bring me later at the embassy, will you?
Which reminds me, our foreign minister would like to see you.
It seems that it's a matter your ambassador would prefer to have handled through his first secretary.
I'm sorry, darling. I'm afraid that means I'll have to let you go home on your own. I'll put you in a taxi.
You needn't bother. Regards to His Excellency.
I hope you forgive our kidnapping your husband the instant he arrives.
Only a diplomat's wife knows how expendable a diplomat is. Kramerstrasse 81.
That scene was so short. We went directly from, we're going to put you in a cab away from the airport, to, nope, I'm going to catch one myself, to directly in the cab, and here's my destination. Bam, done. It's because the journey isn't important. What's important about that scene is what occurs between Mrs. Wardh, her husband, and the people who have come to get him. She's a little resentful of his job and the relationship he has with his colleagues and how his job takes him away from her. The context that causes that conversation in the airport is important, but nothing about her journey home is. So the director just cut it all out. And that was a wise decision, as we see from Final Justice, where there's just this filler scene that has no meaning whatsoever. All right, so the third example we're going to watch is from Suspiria. It's going to be a little longer, and I'm probably going to have a lot more to say about it.
Abflugverspätung des SAS-Fluges 641. Weiterflug nach Mailand bis 12:45 Uhr.
Wohin?
Escherstraße.
Was?
Escherstraße?
Was? Escherstraße. Ja.
This sequence has a lot going on. There's a lot of conversation between big fans of this movie about what all the stuff in this scene means. For example, what it means that the shot of her facing the doors has this background music, and then the cut, there's no background music when we cut back to her in the airport. What is that about? We don't really know. One of the theories of the film is that it's completely subjective from her point of view, like it's all in her head. And so we could be seeing a fantasy. Another possibility is that Argento is trying deliberately to unsettle us, because the whole rest of the sequence definitely does that. Changes in music, the weird cut to an extreme close-up of the mechanism of the door opening and then the mechanism of it closing. Why is that there? It's not clear. However, that's what makes Argento so great. Okay, this sequence is an example of the filmmaker wasting our time but not using shoe leather. We might not understand perfectly the first or even the 40th time we see this film, but it's clearly not filler the way that the Greydon Clark sequence was, and it's also not efficient the way that the Martino scene was. It's something else. This third one is doing a bunch of different things. It's developing character, it's doing interesting lighting stuff to kind of set up our expectations for color for the rest of the film. It's unsettling us purposely, and it's giving us clues about the odd things that this film might be doing here and in the future. So, I hope comparing these sequences was helpful for you. There's a lot to learn about shoe leather and about what wastes the audience's time and what doesn't, and whether a director is doing time wasting deliberately or not. And this is just a few minutes of it. So, hope to see you next time.
Being gently nudged with a briefcase is one weakness.